When you stop begging for love, something profound happens. You begin to reclaim your self-worth. Not in the loud, ego-driven sense of defiance or revenge, but in the quiet, steady realization that you were never meant to plead for what should be freely given. You begin to understand that the love you were desperate to receive was never proof of your worth in the first place. It was only a mirror reflecting how little you believed in it yourself. There is a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes slowly creeping in, when you get tired. Tired of explaining yourself. Tired of shrinking. Tired of bending and twisting and compromising just to be chosen, to be seen. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is wisdom arriving. The wisdom that tells you, love is not something you convince someone to give you. It's something you allow to find you when you stop running from yourself. People who beg for love aren't weak. They're just people who forgot who they are. Somewhere along the way, through childhood wounds, failed relationships, abandonment, rejection, they were taught that their value comes with conditions. Be quiet and good and small, and maybe you'll be loved. Don't take up too much space. Don't ask for too much. Be grateful for what little affection someone tosses your way. They were taught to earn love, not to expect it freely. And when you live like that long enough, you start mistaking crumbs for feasts. You start chasing people who only love you in fragments, believing that those fragments are all you deserve. And every time they ignore you, every time they withdraw, every time they make you feel like too much or not enough, you don't walk away. You try harder. Because deep down you think that if you can just be better, quieter, prettier, smarter, more useful, more perfect, then maybe they'll stay. Maybe they'll love you the way you've always hoped to be loved. But that's not love, that's survival. True self-worth doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It simply knows. It knows that you are already worthy, not because someone else confirms it, but because you are here, alive, breathing, human. The moment you stop begging is the moment you start remembering. You begin to remember that your heart isn't a bargaining chip, that your presence isn't a favor, that your love is not a currency to be exchanged for approval. It is a gift. And I know, it's hard. There's grief in letting go of the person you used to be. There's grief in realizing how many times you settled, how often you lowered your standards, how deeply you wanted to be chosen by someone who never saw you clearly. But that grief is sacred. It's the funeral of your former self, the one who didn't know better, the one who tried so hard, the one who meant well. And in that burial, something beautiful is born. Because when you stop begging for love, you make space for dignity. You start to carry yourself differently. Your silence becomes powerful. Your absence becomes loud. You don't chase. You don't over-explain. You don't tolerate emotional breadcrumbs, and the people who were only drawn to you because you are willing to overgive, they start to disappear. Let them. This process, it's not about arrogance. It's not about closing your heart or building walls. It's about rising into the truth of who you are. You realize you are not a backup plan, not an option, not someone to be kept in the wings until someone is ready. You are the main event. And you no longer settle for being someone's convenience when you know you were born to be a choice. In the silence that follows the begging, you hear your own voice again. And it's clear. It's calm. It says, you don't need to earn what should be given freely. You don't need to fight to be seen. You don't need to keep people who don't know how to hold you. That voice, your true voice, was buried under fear and unworthiness for so long, but now it returns. And when it does, you feel it in your bones. You are already enough. Not someday, not if, not when. Now. So I say this not as a lesson, but as a lived truth. Stop begging, and you will begin to rise. Let go of the need to be chosen, and choose yourself. You'll be surprised at what meets you when you do. This is what happens when you remember who you are. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize they've been mistaking emotional dependency for love. It often comes quietly, perhaps in the silence after an unanswered message, or in the hollow ache of giving and giving with nothing truly coming back. You think, maybe if I just hold on a little longer, maybe if I fix myself, they'll love me better. And that's when it becomes clear, it's fear in disguise. It's a child inside you, trying to earn something it should have always received, without condition. To stop begging for love is to interrupt this cycle, and when you do, you start to see clearly for the first time. You see the way you've tied your self-worth to someone else's attention. You see how you've defined stability as the absence of abandonment, even when that stability was built on unpredictability, inconsistency, and pain. That realization isn't easy. In fact, it can break your heart. But it's the breaking that begins the healing. Love that's rooted in desperation is not love at all. It's survival. It's an adaptation. It's what happens when a person learns that connection must be earned through sacrifice. And the truth is, the deeper the wound, the more elaborate the strategies become. You become the caretaker, the people pleaser, the overachiever. You become so attuned to the emotional needs of others that you forget your own. You read their moods like weather patterns, walking on eggshells, shrinking, apologizing for taking up space. But in all that, what you're really doing is trying to secure safety. You're saying, if I can just be perfect enough, maybe they won't leave. But love is not something that can be earned through performance. Not real love. Real love isn't conditional. It doesn't vanish when you're messy or human or inconvenient. When you stop begging, when you stop trying to earn love by twisting yourself into a version of who you think you should be, something shifts internally. You begin to realize that love was never supposed to feel like a test you keep failing. Breaking free from emotional dependency is like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were in. You look back and see just how much of yourself you gave away trying to hold on to someone who didn't know how to hold you. You see the nights you stayed up waiting, the apologies you gave that weren't yours to carry, the boundaries you abandoned just to feel close, even if that closeness was hollow. It takes courage to look at all of that and say, no more, not in bitterness, but in clarity. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop interpreting inconsistency as passion. You stop confusing the emotional roller coaster for deep connection. You recognize that the butterflies you used to feel were often just anxiety dressed up as love. In this space of awareness, you begin to heal. You start to grieve, not just the people who hurt you, but the version of you who accepted that pain as normal. You begin to soothe the part of you that clung so tightly, not because it was foolish, but because it was terrified of being abandoned again. And with time, you learn to sit with that fear without letting it control you. You learn to meet your own emotional needs rather than outsourcing them to someone else's inconsistent affection. This isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming whole. When you stop relying on another person to make you feel loved, worthy, or secure, you take your power back. That power doesn't roar, it hums. It feels like peace. It feels like knowing you can enjoy love without needing it to survive. You can walk away when it's no longer healthy, not because you're heartless, but because you've finally made peace with yourself. What's beautiful about this transformation is that you begin to attract different dynamics, not because you're demanding more, but because you've raised your own standard for how you deserve to be treated. You're no longer looking to be saved. You're no longer afraid to be alone. You don't need someone to complete you. You need someone who complements the completeness you've already built. So when the day comes that someone tries to offer you love that's laced with confusion or inconsistency, you won't chase it. You'll feel the old pull, yes, but you'll also feel the new power. The one that says, I've been here before, and I know better now. And you'll walk away, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. This is what happens when you stop confusing pain with love. When you stop begging for love, something inside you shifts. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as subtle as a moment of stillness where you realize, I don't need to keep proving I'm worth staying for. And that realization doesn't just change how you see others, it transforms how you relate to yourself. From that space, something powerful begins to take shape: boundaries. For most of us, the word boundaries used to feel harsh, almost unloving, like a wall, like something that pushes people away. But that's because we were taught that love means selflessness, sacrifice, always saying yes, always being available. We were taught that to love well was to give endlessly, even when it hurt. And so, many of us grew up believing that if we just loved hard enough, if we gave enough, if we stayed patient and open and forgiving no matter what, eventually we'd be loved the way we needed in return. But that's not how it works. Love doesn't thrive in chaos. It doesn't grow in places where our needs are ignored, and it certainly can't breathe in spaces where we are constantly abandoning ourselves for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. They are the framework in which real, healthy, sustaining love is made possible. When you stop begging, you begin to see what you were blind to before. You notice how often you silenced your needs just to keep someone from pulling away. How many times you swallowed your truth, put on a smile, or made excuses for someone else's behavior, not because it was okay, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you said, "This doesn't work for me." In the absence of self-worth, we convince ourselves that love must be preserved at any cost, even if the cost is us. But then something happens. You stop. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop fearing that speaking your truth will drive love away, because you finally realize, if love leaves because of a boundary, it was never love to begin with. And so you begin to draw the lines, not to punish anyone, not to test them, but to protect the peace you are now committed to building within yourself. You say things like, "I won't tolerate being spoken to that way. If I feel disrespected, I will remove myself. My time matters. My feelings matter." And maybe at first, your voice shakes, maybe it feels unnatural or even selfish. But over time it becomes easier, it becomes clear. Because it's not selfish to expect reciprocity. It's not selfish to want respect. It's not selfish to say no to relationships that drain you. What you come to understand is that boundaries aren't walls, they are doors. Doors that let the right people in and keep the wrong patterns out. They are the sacred agreements you make with yourself that say, "I am not available for anything that costs me my peace, my dignity, or my sense of self." And with each boundary you hold, you teach others how to treat you. Not through demands, but through demonstration. Some people won't like the new you. The you who no longer says yes to everything. The you who doesn't engage in chaos. The you who walks away when respect is missing. Let them go. Not out of anger, but from understanding. They were connected to your old self. The one who thought love had to be earned through self-sacrifice. The more you honor your boundaries, the more you realize how little you need to tolerate. You stop romanticizing struggle. You stop glamorizing emotional unavailability. You stop thinking that difficult love is deep love. And you start to see how peace, kindness, and mutual respect are actually the deepest forms of love there are. It's funny, when you finally stop begging for love, the love you give yourself becomes louder than the love you used to chase. And that inner love, the kind that draws boundaries, that stands tall, that doesn't shrink to fit, is what creates the space for real connection. Not connection born from fear, or from need, or from wounds, but from truth. So when someone says, "You've changed," you'll smile. Because yes, you have. You're no longer available for the kind of love that asks you to abandon yourself. You've remembered that love isn't proven through pain, but through presence, through care, through boundaries that say, "I love me too." This is what happens when you finally stop making yourself small. Something remarkable happens when you stop begging for love. You no longer feel compelled to chase what isn't meant for you. You don't force connections. You don't cling to people who show you over and over again that they can't meet you where you are. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to attract relationships that reflect who you've become, not who you were when you were still operating out of fear, longing, or lack. When you're in the mindset of chasing love, it's easy to confuse effort with alignment. You think, if I just keep giving more, trying harder, staying longer, they'll see me, they'll understand, and you end up pouring yourself into people who may not even have the capacity to receive you. That kind of love, the kind you have to chase down, explain yourself to, convince someone of, it's not love. It's performance. It's auditioning for a role in someone's life that should have been freely offered. But when you stop begging, your perspective changes. You no longer see love as something to be earned or hunted down. You stop believing that compatibility is about convincing someone to stay. Instead, you begin to notice the quiet power of mutuality, where love flows naturally, where effort is shared, and where presence is consistent, not just convenient. It's in that space that something incredible happens. You start attracting people who recognize you without needing you to shrink, shift, or explain your worth. People who don't need to be persuaded. People who aren't triggered by your depth, your voice, your strength. They arrive not because you begged for them, but because you created space by letting go of what was never meant for you in the first place. You begin to recognize red flags, not as challenges to overcome, but as signs to walk away. You don't try to fix or rescue anyone anymore. You realize that love is not about rescuing. It's about rising together. And when someone can't meet you where you are, you don't chase them. You wish them well and move forward. Because you've outgrown relationships that require you to abandon yourself. This shift doesn't make you hard or cold. Quite the opposite. It makes you softer, but in the right way. Softer with yourself. More patient, more discerning. You're no longer desperate to fill a void. You're conscious about who gets access to your heart. You don't tolerate emotional laziness or half-commitments. You don't stay in rooms where you feel like a stranger. You've learned that it's better to be alone in your truth than surrounded by people who only want fragments of you. And here's the beautiful irony. When you let go of forcing love, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to be, but because you are finally rooted in your own energy. There's something deeply attractive about someone who's not seeking completion from another person. You begin to draw in relationships that feel easy, not effortless, but natural. No push and pull, no walking on eggshells. Just clarity, honesty, connection. That doesn't mean every relationship that enters your life will be forever, but now you approach love with awareness. You're able to recognize who's a lesson and who's a partner. And when someone isn't right, you don't internalize it as rejection. You understand it as redirection. You know that not everything is meant to last, and that doesn't make it a failure. It just means you're getting closer to what is meant for you. When you're no longer begging, you also stop tolerating inconsistency disguised as passion. You no longer believe that chaos is love. You stop thinking you have to earn someone's affection by waiting through their confusion or silence. You begin to believe that the right connection will not make you feel anxious. It will feel like home. It will feel like peace. And you won't need to beg for it, because it will come to you already whole, already willing, already ready. And that's when you realize the most important relationship you ever formed wasn't the one that finally stayed. It was the one you built with yourself, the moment you stopped chasing and started choosing, the moment you stopped seeking and started becoming. This is what happens when you stop begging and allow love to meet you where you are. There's a quiet kind of freedom that emerges when you stop begging for love. It doesn't roar in loudly. It unfolds slowly and steadily in your daily life. And one of the most beautiful things about that freedom is this. you begin to redefine what love actually means to you. Not what the world told you it should look like, not what your past convinced you to settle for, but something more real, more grounded, more aligned with the person you've become. When we're in the pattern of begging for love, we often don't even realize that we're working from someone else's blueprint. Maybe we picked it up in childhood, where love was conditional, based on behavior, performance, silence, or sacrifice. Or maybe we shaped our idea of love around stories that were more about possession and control than they were about presence and care. And so we kept looking for that same kind of love, over and over again, even when it hurt, even when it left us empty, because it felt familiar. It felt like home, even if that home was built on shaky ground. But when you step away from begging, something changes. You start to realize that love isn't supposed to feel like waiting by the phone. It's not supposed to feel like a series of emotional tests you're trying to pass. It's not meant to feel like holding your breath or hiding parts of yourself just to be tolerated. That wasn't love. That was survival, wearing love's mask. And so you begin to unlearn. You begin to question what you once accepted without thought. You start asking, what do I really want love to feel like? What does it look like when it's safe, when it's mutual, when it's free from manipulation or performance? You start rewriting your own definition, and not from a place of fantasy, but from clarity, from having lived through what it's not. In this space, you start to prioritize peace, not the absence of problems, but the presence of respect. Consistency becomes more attractive than charm. Stability becomes more appealing than passion without purpose. You stop romanticizing chaos. You stop interpreting confusion as intensity. You stop believing that love must come with drama or pain to mean something. Instead, you start seeking love that feels like a deep exhale, love that allows you to stay soft, not because you're trying to be loved, but because you already are. You also start to notice that real love honors individuality. It doesn't require you to shrink or twist yourself into someone more palatable. You are no longer drawn to the people who only loved you when you were quiet, agreeable, or useful. You start to crave connection with those who see you, truly see you, and who welcome all the parts of you, even the ones you used to hide. That kind of love doesn't make you smaller, it expands you. It gives you space to grow. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to realize that love is not a destination. It's not a prize you finally win after enough struggle. It's a way of being. It's how someone speaks to you when you're hurting. It's how they show up when things aren't easy. It's how you feel about yourself when you're with them. And when you've stopped begging, you can finally see all of that clearly, because you're not trying to convince anyone to love you anymore. You're allowing the truth of your being to speak for itself. That clarity gives you power, quiet power, the power to walk away from what no longer fits, the power to wait, not in fear or scarcity, but in confidence, trusting that love will come, not because you forced it, but because you became aligned with it, because you did the work to stop settling, to stop chasing, to stop bending. The definition of love you hold today is no longer rooted in desperation. It is rooted in choice, in discernment, in deep self-respect. And when love arrives, and it will, you won't have to beg for it. You won't have to second-guess it. It will feel like something you've known all along, even if you've never experienced it before. This is what happens when you finally learn that love, real love, starts within. There's a certain kind of peace that finds you when you finally stop begging for love. Not the fleeting peace of avoidance or detachment, but the lasting peace of alignment. It's the moment when you stop chasing and start choosing. When you no longer operate from the wound, but from the wisdom that the wound gave you. And perhaps the most profound truth that settles in during this shift is this: you are already whole. For most of our lives, we carry around this quiet ache, the belief that something outside of us will complete us, that if we could just find the right person, someone who stays, who sees us, who finally chooses us, we would finally feel enough. But that belief is a trap. It keeps us searching outward, when the real journey has always been inward. Because the love we were searching for, the belonging we craved, it was never about them. It was always about us remembering ourselves. When you stop begging for love, you stop outsourcing your worth. You stop handing over the keys to your peace. You stop believing that your value rises or falls depending on who loves you or who walks away. That's when everything begins to shift. Not because you've hardened, not because you've built walls, but because you've remembered the truth. You are not missing anything. This realization doesn't come all at once. It comes slowly through the quiet moments. When you make a decision that honors your boundaries, when you feel the pull to go back to something familiar but choose yourself instead. When you sit with your loneliness and realize it's not empty, it's spacious. It's an opening, not a void. It's where you begin to plant something new. And so the journey turns inward. You begin to reclaim all the pieces of yourself you gave away in the name of love. The laughter you muted, the truths you swallowed, the dreams you deferred. You call them back. Not with anger, but with reverence. You begin to nourish the parts of you that were ignored, silenced, or rejected. And you realize, this is the relationship I've been waiting for. Not with someone else, with myself. You also start to trust yourself again, to believe your gut when it tells you, this doesn't feel right. You stop second-guessing your own experience. You stop needing someone else to validate your reality. That trust becomes your anchor. It keeps you steady when temptation comes to settle, to shrink, to slip back into old patterns. You recognize the cost now. You know what it takes to abandon yourself, and you're no longer willing to pay that price. You also begin to see love differently, not as rescue, not as escape, but as partnership. You no longer crave someone to complete you because you're not incomplete. You want someone who meets you where you are, not someone who fills a hole, but someone who honors the wholeness you've already claimed. And so your standards rise, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. You are no longer available for love that costs your peace. You are only available for love that mirrors your growth. And here's the most unexpected part. When you stop begging for love, you become love. You start to radiate something different. You become more compassionate, more grounded, more generous. Not because you're trying to earn affection, but because your cup is full. You don't give to be chosen, you give because it overflows. You don't perform, you simply exist in your truth. And that becomes enough. You also learn that solitude isn't a punishment. It's a return. A sacred space where your voice becomes clearer, where your needs become non-negotiable, where your soul gets room to breathe. And in that space, you don't just heal, you rise. You become the version of yourself that was waiting beneath the layers of self-doubt, fear, and longing. It's in this rising that you understand. The love you thought you had to beg for was never meant to be begged for. It was meant to be recognized. And now that you see yourself clearly, you won't accept anything less. Not because you're closed off, but because you're finally open. To truth, to reciprocity, to real love. And when it comes, if it comes, you'll welcome it with open hands, not because you need it, but because it fits, because it feels like a mirror, not a bandage. And until then, you'll keep choosing yourself, again and again, with gentleness, with strength, with peace. This is what happens when you realize you were never lacking to begin with. If this message resonated with you, if you're done begging for love and ready to reclaim your worth, don't keep this transformation to yourself. Like this video to let the world know you're choosing peace. Share it with someone who needs to hear they're already enough. And subscribe for more content that helps you rise, reflect, and remember your power. You are not alone in this journey. Let's keep growing together. Thank you.